Okay, folks should be seeing the title slide says alternatives to calling the police on neighbors, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight. For those who aren't familiar with us, TakeRoot Justice is a nonprofit legal services provider. We work with grassroots groups who are organizing against racial, economic, and social oppression. We've had the privilege of working with Cooper Square Committee and with many of you for years, and have to say, so grateful for all of the work that you all do, and that our work is not possible without all of you building and maintaining the tenant movement. So we are going to talk about, it can be a very sticky issue, but we're going to talk about alternatives to calling law enforcement or the police in disputes with neighbors. We're going to talk about why people do call the police and what kinds of situations people are in that motivate them to do that. Why we might consider other options when we're organizing, and what some of those options are. So first, let me say, the decision to call the police or other law enforcement is a decision that only you can make. Only you are the one in that situation, knowing what's going on, knowing what kind of risks you have and how it's affecting you. And the purpose of tonight's training is not at all to dictate to people what they should or shouldn't do. Many of us do have strong feelings about involving the police. But the most important thing that Cooper Square Committee stands for, that TakeRoot stands for, that all of your work stands for, is that tenants need to have the power to make decisions for themselves. So we're going to talk about some of the practical reasons why calling the police in a neighbor dispute or a dispute in the building can backfire or have consequences that we might not want, and what some other more effective tools might be. But first, I actually just wanted to open it up to discussion to the people here. A question: what are some of the reasons why people call the police about neighbors or about people in their buildings? What are some of the situations that people have seen or heard from other people? What are some of the concerns people have that might lead them to calling the police? You can answer either by putting up your hand or unmuting or putting something in chat. If I don't call on you, I apologize. It's just because with the screen sharing, I can't always see everybody. But I really welcome people to just speak up about, whether it's you or whether it's somebody else that you've seen. What are some of the reasons that people call the police? And I see CM mentioning domestic arguments that people can hear throughout the building. Yeah. And says noise. Mhm. Keep it going. What else do people sometimes call the police about, or what prompts people to call the police? So Emily says violence, drug dealing, loitering by drug users, drug activity, says Anne. Uh-huh. Okay. Parties, says Cynthia, loud parties. Mhm. Okay. Other things? All right. Well, I appreciate people putting those out there. And so, yeah, we see that there's a range of reasons. Theft in the building, says Emily, uh, that have to do with disputes between neighbors, things that affect our quality of life or our ability to live peacefully in our apartments. Uh, Things that may be crimes, things that make us unsafe, things that might involve people from outside the building coming into the building. Yeah, we live in the city and there is a lot that goes on. Mental health crisis via 911 calls, stolen packages, and those are all really serious things. And I respect and have, and have sometimes called the police myself in some of these situations. But I want to talk about some of the downsides to calling the police. Um, One is that it can often cause things to spiral into unintended consequences or make things worse. The second is that the police often don't solve the problem. And finally, that when we're calling the police in disputes with our neighbors, it can divide our buildings and it can play into landlords' hands and reduce our power as tenants. So I want to talk about what I mean by those things. First, criminal law is something that really isn't designed for resolving neighbor disputes, and police and prosecutors and courts, that isn't their main purpose, right? When they are prosecuting or arresting or judging, their purpose is to determine guilt and to punish, but often without paying very much attention to what's going on the ground where the original problem happened. We know that involving the police can escalate things. We've seen uh, a lot of horrible situations where even a wellness check or what a call to the police for help has escalated into violence. There's also it's not uncommon that when somebody makes a police report about another person, that person may, in order to get revenge or to protect themselves, uh, might make complaints back against the person who called the police. And I've definitely seen that when that happens, landlords won't hesitate to blame both sides. And I've seen landlords bring eviction cases against both sides of people who have made complaints against each other. Uh, Involving the police and criminal legal system can also have all kinds of consequences that aren't what we're trying to do. We might be responding to feeling unsafe or wanting to have peace in the building, but the criminal legal system will often cause people to lose their children, their jobs, can bring attention from ICE, it can put people at risk of deportation. And once someone is in the criminal legal system, even if it's for something relatively small, like a noise or disturbing the peace, it's very hard for them to get out, and they may have trouble uh, having custody of their kids, or being able to get jobs, or uh, being able to find a place to live for years to come. And so all of that is stuff that's brought in by the system that really doesn't have anything to do with the problems that we're trying to solve. And again, the job of the legal system is to punish, not solve problems, right? Prosecutors don't work for us. We're not their, well, they do actually work for us, but we're not their clients. And they're not in court trying to make our buildings a better place to live. They're in court trying to win cases, right? Uh, Usually, we continue to share our buildings with the people who have been arrested, and that's often an irreparable break in the relationship, but we're still here having to deal with each other. And very often, it does nothing about what is underlying the conflict or what caused the conflict in the first place, which could come from disability or illness or people having different people in their households. or different cultural assumptions about what's normal behavior. None of that gets addressed, and for sure, the police, uh, that is not part of their jobs, and they don't address those issues. And then, finally, whenever we exclude a neighbor, we reduce our power because the only power we have is our power in numbers. And not only uh, do we possibly exclude one household, but these things can escalate and people wind up taking sides. And I've seen tenant associations fall apart around these kinds of fights. Organizing, none of you need me to tell you this, but we all know that organizing is very hard. And that if we only organize with people we get along with, we won't have very many people to organize with. And so all kinds of organizing efforts, whether they're tenant associations or labor unions or community groups, uh, need to have a way to resolve conflicts between the people in the organization without turning to give more power to the institution or the people that we're trying to deal with. So, for example, police involvement gives a lot of power to landlords. Even the suggestion of involvement by police can be a basis for evictions, can be a broad basis for evictions. It can be a basis for landlords to impose new rules in the building that are more restrictive for everybody. I've seen landlords bring eviction cases against people for completely unrelated conduct, but say, well, I have to because there's now a culture of lawlessness in the building. So again, whenever we give a landlord some power, right, they're going to use it. They're going to use it not just against, the person who might have hurt their neighbors or against the problem. They're going to use it against everybody. And so those are all things that could come back at us every time the police get involved. And those are reasons why it's useful for us to look for other alternatives that might actually be more aimed at actually solving our problems and making peace in our buildings and making us all safe. Right. So some things to do, and by saying this, I don't want to imply that anyone on this call hasn't done these things, um, but they don't always happen. Um, and I should say, they're just like calling the police usually doesn't solve the problem. Nothing I'm going to talk about tonight is a magic wand that will solve a problem. But I think that these things, and my experience has been that these things have a better chance of actually getting us to where we want to get, which is a peaceful building where tenants can work together and have power against landlords who are exploitive and abusive. And that's because these alternatives are actually intended to do that. Whereas, again, that's not the mission of the police or the prosecutors or the courts. So the first thing that's important is always finding out more about the neighbor and what is their situation. Not trying to deal with things alone. And then there are actual free and formal resources out there for mediation, and some of them can provide help even when the other party doesn't agree to it. Because I know it's very easy to say, oh, there's a free mediation service, but when the other person doesn't take the invitation to go to mediation, that's not worth much. But some of these mediation services actually have ways that they can work with individuals or with a tenant association, even without the direct participation of the other party, that can be useful. So it's important to know what's causing this conduct, right? And so, uh, you know, if a neighbor is doing something that's disturbing the peace in the building. It's loud, or they're insulting or abusive, or there's smells coming from their apartment, or they seem to be using drugs. Some things to think about are what's causing this, right? So does someone in their apartment have a disability or an illness that affects the way that they're acting? Is there somebody in their household that they can't control? Is there an adult child who they can't control? Is there even a minor child who they are having trouble controlling? Are they themselves having difficulty controlling themselves, right? Have they ever been a tenant before, right? Is this their first time being a tenant? Do they know what that entails and what their responsibilities are to other people? Is there something that they need, some kind of resource that they're not getting, which is causing, chaos or an inability to control what's going on in their household? And just even why are they doing what they're doing? Uh, and while I was putting together this training, I actually stumbled across some really useful tips from the Bowery mission on responding to someone who is having a mental health crisis, but really, uh, we don't always know if somebody is having a mental health crisis. So, you might think of these as tips when we encounter somebody who's behaving erratically or disturbingly, right? Um, first, it's perfectly normal to feel scared and confused, to feel threatened. Um, and none of this is to imply that, our own safety is not important, or that these situations can't be very serious. So the Bowery mission suggests is always stopping to try to figure out the whole situation, to figure out exactly what's going on, what the concerns are, what the risks are, what we know, what we don't know about what's going on, and to take account of our own prejudices and our own preconceived notions about what the meaning of the situation is, or the meaning of someone's behavior is, or why they're doing it. Uh, if you think that it might be mental health related, and that is very common basis for neighbor disputes, there is right away an alternative to calling 911, which is 988, which is, folks may have heard of this. It's a city provided free 24/7 hotline for anyone experiencing any type of mental health related distress. All you have to do is call or text 988. They also have a website where I think you can engage in a live chat through the website, but I'm not exactly sure how that works. That among the things that can happen is that can result in the city sending out a team of practitioners, an emergency team of practitioners. That's not necessarily going to happen, but calling 988 can open the possibility of having access to that kind of resource. Um, Seek support, and don't try to do things alone. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. First, it's for safety. Second, because it's a heavy burden to take on, to confront a neighbor uh, when there's tension and conflict. And a good reminder from the Bowery mission that uh, you know these interactions can be really hard, and they can leave us feeling unsafe, disturbed, confused, shaken. Um, and that's a real thing, and that we can take care of it, that it's important to talk to other people about it, and process whatever happened, because even if somebody else is having a mental health crisis and they're not doing something wrong and they're not a villain, that doesn't mean that you haven't gotten hurt. Um, and so it's important to pay attention to that. And this is something that the police don't do, right? The police will not help anybody get past or heal from a bad interaction. So don't do it alone, right? For the reasons we just said, it could be it's safer to do it with other people. It's good to have other people you can talk about and process it with, but also just having others involved can turn down the temperature, right? So, uh, you know, if even if you feel safe approaching the neighbor, you may want to ask another neighbor to come with you just so that it's not a you versus them situation, right? Uh, if there's a tenant association in the building, you might ask other people in the tenant association if they could talk to the person. Um, and the purpose here is not to kind of sick the tenant association on people, um, but that I have certainly gone in hot when talking to my neighbors. Um, and it always helps the situation to have others there who are taking things seriously, but aren't necessarily reacting to having been disturbed or be on their last nerve with somebody who's been making it hard for you to sleep or has been sending smoke into your apartment. You can also approach them. You can go to a tenant organizer or an organization like Cooper Square Committee for help. Um, Not only are they good at approaching people, uh, and their job is to talk to as many people as possible in the building, but they also often have access to other and knowledge of other kinds of resources that may be necessary here. There are formal mediation resources. Again, I know it's hard to get somebody else involved in it, um, but it can become more possible if you've got other neighbors involved and suggesting this. So the first line is the New York Peace Institute. They are actually contracted by the city to provide dispute resolution to people in Manhattan. It's free. They specifically include among the areas that they do dispute resolution about noise, pets, neighbor boundaries, evictions. They can mediate disputes between tenants and commercial neighbors or businesses nearby. They can mediate disputes between landlords and tenants. That's not what we're here to talk about today. So if you go to them, they will reach out to the other party, which you might prefer, right? That means you don't necessarily have to be in the position of knocking on their door or putting yourself physically in the same place with them. They're going to be courteous and formal and respectful when they reach out and they know what they're doing. And they have ways of reaching out so as to try not to provoke an overreaction. And what's interesting is even if the other party won't participate, the Peace Institute will actually still meet with you or with the tenant association to strategize around the conflict. And they have conflict resolution professionals who talk about strategies. So even if the other party doesn't agree to mediation, they can help advise you on how to deal with the conflict without escalating it. There's their phone number. That is their email. As always, we'll be sharing the slides. So if you don't get to write down all the contact information or the website information, don't worry, this will be coming to you in the next couple days. Uh, this is much more limited, but MEND NYC, which stands for Mediating Establishment and Neighborhood Disputes, is available. This is only when the dispute is between you and a business. So like a commercial tenant in the building or the bar next door. But if that is what's going on, um, this is their purpose for existing, and they are a city initiative. So again, this is free of charge. And this can be used, for example, if the conflict is that because of the business next door, there are people where your conflict might be with people who are hanging out in front of the building or coming in, but where you think that that problem might be being partially caused by the bar or the store next door, or they're refusing to work with you to try to get peace. Other resources, if you realize that the neighbor might not be able to take care of themselves, so if the dispute might be coming from the fact that they're not able to take care of their apartment, or they can't control other people in their household, or they're just not able to restrain their actions. Adult Protective Services can go and do an assessment and see whether they need support. And those are the numbers there of the APS offices in different boroughs. If you think there might be elder abuse, so if the tenant might be aging, and the conflict is coming from someone else in their apartment who they're not able to control, who is overruling them, who might, in fact, be making their lives a living hell as well, you can report suspected elder abuse to the Department for the Aging. And that is specifically, that number there is specifically their hotline for elder abuse, if you suspect. And then when you call that number, they'll talk to you they'll ask you some questions, and they'll help figure out where you should be directed to. And then here again is the 988 helpline, which is the alternative to calling 911 for mental health related crises.